All right, let's just jump right in. Picture this. You're a business owner, maybe Gen X. You've spent decades building your company from the ground up. And then you do it. You land the big one, that huge national account, the whale. Suddenly, your revenue goes through the roof. It feels incredible, right? Like you finally made it. But when you decide it's time to sell, that incredible trophy can start to look like a huge risk. And that right there is the heart of the issue. The thing you're most proud of, your biggest win, a potential buyer sees as a massive single point of failure. It really can flip that fast. One tough diligence call, that's when the buyer puts your business under a microscope, and the whole conversation changes from your success story to their potential nightmare. And you can just watch your valuation start to tick down.
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And sometimes I mean that literally. But here's the good news. You absolutely can protect your price. The trick isn't to hide the risk. It's to get out ahead of it, to define it, to contain it, and to structure the deal in a way that protects the value you've worked so hard to build. And in this explainer, we're going to walk through exactly how you do that.
Okay, so first things first. To solve this problem, you have to see it from their side of the table. We need to get inside the buyer's head. Understand precisely why one big customer makes them so incredibly nervous. Because once you really get what they're afraid of, you can start to take that fear apart, piece by piece. So let's talk numbers. This range, 15 to 20%, that's kind of the first warning bell. Once any single customer makes up this much of your revenue, you can bet that a buyer's alarms are starting to go off. Now, it's not a deal killer, not yet, but it is a big, flashing sign for them that says, hey, slow down, look a lot closer, and you can expect the questions from them and their lenders to get a whole lot tougher. And, it just escalates from there. Once you cross that 30% line, it's not just a yellow flag anymore. It becomes a big, flashing red light. At this level, it's officially a high-risk issue, and you should absolutely expect it to have a direct, negative impact on your company's valuation, unless you walk in with a bulletproof plan to address it. Now, this is a really crucial piece of buyer psychology to understand. They don't just look at your whole company and apply a discount. No, in their minds, they're basically buying two different businesses. First, there's your core business, all the other customers, hopefully stable and diversified. And then there's this other thing, this one giant risky account that could be an incredible asset or could blow up and sink their entire investment. So what are they really worried about? Well, number one is cash flow. Lenders especially need to know that the business can easily cover its debt payments. If you lose that one big customer, that calculation can go out the window overnight. And second, they're terrified that the relationship is with you personally, not with the company. They worry that if you walk out the door, that revenue walks out with you. It's what they call non-transferable revenue, and it's a huge red flag for them. I love this analogy because it just perfectly captures the feeling. I mean, you might be driving along just fine. Everything feels smooth. But to an outsider looking in, it just looks precarious. All they see is that little donut spare tire, and all they can think is, man, what happens if that thing blows out on the highway? Your job is to prove to them that it's not a flimsy spare. It's a high-performance, run-flat tire that's good for hundreds of miles. So how do we actually do that? This is where we pivot. We stop playing defense, and we start playing offense. Instead of just waiting for their worried questions, you walk into the negotiation with a solution already built. And that solution often involves something called a ring-fenced earnout. It's a really smart piece of deal structuring. Let's look at the actual math, because this is where it really hits home. In this real-world example, a buyer offered a solid 5.5x multiple on the company's core diversified business. But for the revenue from the whale, they slashed the multiple way down to 2.0x because of the risk. The total value? About $4.4 million. But by proposing a ring-fence structure, the seller got the full multiple on the core business up front, and then earned a much higher 4.5x multiple on the whale after it renewed. The difference in their pocket? Over $1.2 million. Huge. This is honestly the simplest way to think about it. The buyer is nervous about the pool, your whale account. So you say, okay, fine. You pay me full price for the house, my core business, today at closing. Then once the pool passes inspection, meaning once the whale renews their contract with you, then you pay me for the pool. See? It perfectly separates the known, stable value from the perceived risk.
So what exactly is this thing? Well, its power is in how it isolates the risk. It basically carves out a specific piece of the sale price and says, this part is contingent on one single clear event. Usually, that event is your whale customer renewing their contract after the sale. This protects the valuation of everything else you've built.
Now, for this to work, the legal agreement has to be absolutely ironclad. You have to get super specific. You define the exact customer, the revenue baseline to measure against, and the precise trigger for the payout, say a renewal of at least 12 months. And this is critical. You need what's called an efforts covenant. This legally obligates the buyer to actually try to keep the customer happy. It stops them from just letting the account die on the vine and costing you that earnout.
Okay, so proposing this structure, that's only half the battle. To get a buyer to actually agree to it, you have to convince them. You've got to prove that the relationship with that whale is stable, that it's institutionalized, and that it is overwhelmingly likely to renew. You need to build a rock-solid case that makes them feel confident they'll be writing you that second check.
And this is where you have to shift your mindset from storytelling to evidence. Look, every buyer has heard, oh, they love us, they'll never leave 1,000 times before. Those are just anecdotes. You need artifacts. Tangible, documented proof that shows the relationship is deeply embedded in the business itself, not just in your personal relationships.
And you build that proof by creating something we call a customer relationship dossier. Think of it as a binder of evidence, and it's organized around 3 core pillars. First, you map out all the personal connections. Second, you prove your consistent killer performance. And third, you document just how deeply technically integrated your 2 companies really are. So what does that actually look like? What goes in the binder? Well, for the relationship, it's a contact map showing that you talk to people in their ops, their IT, and their finance departments, not just your one buddy in purchasing. It's the meeting minutes from your quarterly business reviews. For performance, it's dashboard showing your 99% on-time delivery rate for the last 3 years. And for technical, it's the actual diagrams of your system integrations that show what a massive pain it would be for them to switch to a competitor.
Okay, I know. This all sounds great, but it also sounds like a lot of work. And it is. You can't just throw this dossier together the weekend before you go to market. The absolute best way to do this is with a disciplined 12-month plan to systematically de-risk your business and get it completely ready for a successful sale.
And here's a simple way to think about it, broken into 4 phases. First 3 months, you're an archivist. You gather everything and build that dossier. Months 3 to 6, you focus on sales, widening your customer base to shrink that concentration percentage. Then, months 6 to 9, you focus on fortifying your contracts with better terms. And finally, in that last quarter, you go for the gold. You try to get a letter of intent to renew from your whale, and you package everything up so it's ready for the buyer's eyes. This is a strategy in a nutshell. You're essentially running 2 clocks at the same time. The growth clock is all about bringing in new customers to make that whale a smaller piece of the overall pie. And the exit clock is about making that whale relationship so well documented, so diligence ready, that it starts to look less like a liability and more like a fortress.
Let this one really sink in for a second, because it is probably the most important concept in this entire process. Buyers are in the business of taking calculated risks. That's what they do. What they hate, what they can't stand, is undefined, unlimited, uncapped risk. If they can't put a box around it and measure it, they will always assume the worst case scenario.
So at the end of the day, your job isn't to pretend the risk doesn't exist. It does. Your job is to take complete control of the narrative around that risk. You define it with your dossier, you contain it with that ring-fenced earn-out structure, and then you get the buyer to agree on exactly how to price it. You turn their biggest fear into just another negotiable line item on the deal sheet.
When you follow this playbook, you're no longer just reacting to a buyer's fears. You are proactively managing them before they even come up. You get to walk into that negotiation not with an apology for having such a great customer, but with a smart structure that protects your price and a dossier full of facts that proves the account's value. You are the one in control.